to Candlelight Yin, candles plus yin. So what we're gonna do to start with is we're gonna start with kind of, it's sort of like the fish pose. You can make it a butterfly if you like that idea better. I'm gonna do a straight-legged position and come back to the butterfly notion near the end. But if you don't mind doing a butterfly shape with your legs twice, then that would work. So you could take a blanket, and all you need to do is just make sure that it's long enough that it can go down the length of your spine, or you can do it crossways so that it goes across, like right around the bottom area of the shoulder blade, if you like that idea better. Both will work. And in that case, all you'll do is either just fold it so that you wind up with like a pranayama bolster sized blanket. If you don't know what that means, it just means a little bolster that's designed to help your chest open. So I'm gonna do that under my legs, just so I have a little bit of support under my knees. And then I'm gonna use a pillow under my back, so it's just a little bit higher up. So if you don't have a pillow, throw pillows will work. You just may have to kind of find ones that are more firm than others. Or you could use some yoga blocks if you actually happen to have those. Put one yoga block under your shoulder blades, one to support your head. Or you can be a little more like the traditional fish pose and let your head drop back, but I prefer my head to be supported. So I'm gonna do this with this pillow. All right, so I'm gonna need the bottom of the pillow to go just about where the bottom of my rib cage is. So the rib cage is being supported in the lift, and then I'm gonna let my head just find a support. I mean, if you want your head to be a little higher, you can put a little blanket under your head, or you can put a little something under the pillow or under the block. Little blocks you can turn a little bit so you get one that's a little higher. And if you're using a blanket, you can sort of fold the blanket up on the end. Blankets might be more comfortable down a little lower towards the lumbar. I like my support to be up a little higher so that I get this kind of definitive lift in the rib cage and then a drop as the shoulder moves over the edge, right? So the arm is gonna hang down a little bit. There's this kind of elevation. It almost feels like you're in a cobra pose upside down. Now again, I'm leaving my legs out straight. I put that blanket just right under the knee so that that bend in my knee has just a little support. It feels nice there. But you could also put the feet together if you don't mind doing a butterfly shape twice. And then just adjust as you see fit. Oh, and we're going to stay here for a good 4 more minutes or so. So we'll just breathe, relax. The arms can drift out wider or come in closer depending on how it feels to you. If I'm close enough to the ground, like sometimes with a blanket I even like to do like more like a cactus shape to the arms, so that the arms are a little bit more up, kind of shoulder height or ear height. This is a little too tall for that kind of a notion. And again, once I settle into place, sometimes I find, oh, I need to readjust my hips or readjust my back. And so make those little adjustments and then just come back to stillness. So if you're relatively new to Yin and you're watching this online, it's a really slow, quiet practice. It doesn't mean you can't move at all. But we're aiming for setting ourselves up to a place where we feel something happening, but we're also relaxing around it. So there's that sense of I'm in a back bend, but I'm relaxing into it. There's a little bit of a sense of this shoulder opening, but not so spicy that I tense up or I find my nervous system trying to protect me. It's a tricky place, that it's called the edge is the way people describe it. And sometimes we think that means like right at the point where I can't stand it anymore, but that's actually way over the edge. We're looking for the spot where, oh, I feel something. And then we just watch that, stay present with the sensation, and as the body softens and releases and opens, then you can add on a little bit. But if we go too far, we kind of fire our protective nervous system up And rather than relax and rest, we'll wind up with a little bit more vigilance in the nervous system than we're really after. So we're going to take about 4 more deep breaths here. Get out of here, I'm going to start with my legs. So if you were doing the butterfly shape, you could bring your knees together. I'm just going to put my feet on the floor so it's easy to kind of push myself really lazy-like over onto my side so I can get the pillow out. And then coming back onto the back, I like to just take a moment and let everything soften and kind of settle in, because there's often a kind of interesting sensation. So sometimes, like tonight, I feel basically it's like there's an impression of the pillow left behind. So I can still feel this kind of pillow-shaped space, and then now my back is kind of slowly filling that space back in, and as that happens, it feels really interesting and kind of wider and a little spacious. So just notice what's true for you, and you may not use those words I just used to describe what your experience is. But just notice your experience, because that's part of the fun of this whole thing, right? Yoga is being present in the moment. Basically, it's anchoring our attention to the present moment. So the tools that we're using, the asana, the poses, and the breath work, and the other maybe some meditative aspects, because we're in these poses for a while, we can stay present and watch the breath. Those are all tools that help us with this notion of we're going to experience life as it's unfolding in the present, rather than kind of all the ruminating on the past and the worrying about the future that we might normally engage in. So creating this kind of balance. And as we go, this is like we're in a week between now and then the beginning of the fall equinox. It's a week from now. So it's a nice kind of opportunity for us to consider, like how am I balancing the attention that I am paying? Am I paying attention always to this future? Am I kind of obsessing a little bit about the past? Am I spending time in the present? And what's the balance of that? There's nothing wrong with remembering the past or planning for the future, unless we're doing it at a detriment of experiencing our life as it unfolds. And so I have a tendency to spend more time in kind of anxious mental states worrying about what's going to happen in the future, and planning for things that aren't happening. And so my task is to try to balance that out and say, well, I'm going to spend at least that same amount of time being present in the future, or present in the moment, as I am spending kind of thinking about the future, with a goal of maybe one day living my entire life in the present. That would be awesome, but we'll see how things go. So we're going to stretch the body out nice and long once you've had a chance to kind of do some movement or some nice things for yourself. And then we're going to stretch into the banana pose. So all I did was just kind of bend from the side of my waist. I don't want to go so far that I start to feel pinchy or any sort of pain or discomfort in between the ribs or between the hip and the rib here. So if you find that you're starting to cramp or anything like that on the inside curve, just back off a little bit. And then the outside you can kind of deepen by swinging the legs over. You can cross one leg over the other. It's not necessarily deep, but it lifts the thigh up a little bit, so there's a little bit more drop for the hip, which pulls a little harder on the tissue. You can take the arm that's on that outside, kind of stretch that over, or you can just soften through the arm. So it's really a matter of how is your body responding to the shape, and then making appropriate choices for yourself. And so we've got one side of the body that's kind of long and stretched out, and one side of the body that's curling in. And then you can adjust your head so it feels like, should you turn the head? Should you let it rest? Just kind of find the right positioning so your neck is happy with you. Now this is a shorter pose. We're going to stay for about like somewhere between 2.5 and 3 minutes, depending on how long it took you to get in here. So we're finding all the little places in the body that are kind of experiencing the tension of the pose through the breath. So as I take a deep breath, I can feel the difference in the tissue on the left side of my body where the stretch is compared to the right side. On the right side, there's a lot more room for the lung to expand. And so I experience a little difference in the breath that way, and a little difference in the kind of tension of the tissue on the side of the body here, the fascia, the skin, the muscle. So we're going to take about 3 more breaths. And then we're going to come on back to the center. So I just kind of meander back. I like to take just a moment and kind of loosen everything up. And again, after I have a chance to do that, I like to pause, kind of settle, and just see if there's a difference. And sometimes I feel a little taller on the side that was longer, that was being stretched out, compared to the side that was all curled in. And I would sort of suggest that right now it feels like I've got at least 1 inch on my left side, and my left arm feels a little longer. But mostly there's just a sense of kind of softer, a little softer on that side. So things have changed. And it's, again, these are just impressions that are coming to my mind from the fascia. So this is important for us to understand that the fascia contains way more nerve endings than the muscle. That's the first thing. And fascia is the connective tissue that sort of wraps around the muscles and holds them together, and it holds the skin. And so there's layers of fascia and muscle and fascia and dermis and epidermis. And in between, where the layers of fascia live, in between muscles, in between the skin and the muscle, anywhere there's that fascia, we can build up the amount of fluid that lives in that area. And most of the time when we're doing these kinds of things like yoga or Pilates or a lot of other kinds of modalities, physical modalities, what we're looking for is for a sense that the body moves more easily, right? That we're more flexible is the word we might use. But what that really means ultimately is that there's actually fluid in between the layers, so the muscle slides on itself a little bit, like the quads slide over each other better, the hamstrings slide over each other better, the outer hip muscles slide a little better, so that as we're moving, the muscles move, the skin moves over that area a little bit more effectively, and it feels like we're much more fluid. It also helps build fluid into the joint itself. So that's what we're aiming for, which is why we're being so long and also why we're trying not to be too aggressive, right? Because if we're really pushy, we're not going to get that. We're going to start to damage the tissue. All right, so when you're ready, you're going to do the other side. And again, I just start somewhere, kind of like a banana kind of shape. And then I test out the different options. Do I want to back off a little bit? If I take a couple of deep breaths, do I get any sense of cramping or anything like that in the curled up side? Should I readjust my shoulder? How do I position my head? All of those things. So you just kind of play with the pose a little bit until you're satisfied with what's happened. And then we're going to pause for a while. And it's that gentle pressure over time that encourages the hydration. It's a mechanism that happens because that tissue has cells in it that produce hyaluronic acid. Hyaluronic acid attracts water to itself. And so then there is a hydrating mechanism that's happening because we're putting this tiny bit of pressure for a length of time of no less than 90 seconds on the tissue. Now we're staying a little longer because yin is a little bit more in the 3 to 10 minute range generally. You can do shorter poses, but generally somewhere in that neighborhood. And then what I would suggest is you just kind of, if you are practicing on your own without any guidance from me or anybody else, you can sort of play with what happens if I only stay in this pose for 2 minutes? What happens if I stay in this pose for longer? When I first started practicing yin yoga, I would try every pose for every length of time, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 20 minutes, to see how long it felt like it was beneficial, and at what point did I start to feel like it was just over the top. And it varies depending on the pose. But, you can certainly engage in that similar kind of experiment on your own and see what your favorite amounts of time are. about another 3 breaths or so. And then we're going to back ourselves off here and take a moment. Oh. So you could do some movement pattern. Whatever feels kind of nice to you, you can check it out. What happened? How did that go? And then if everything is well, then you can make some decisions for yourself. So we're going to come to a Sphinx. So we're going to lay on the belly. Along the way, if you wanted to do some cat-cow or some down dog, or you want to do some interpretive dance, you could do all of those things. So you can kind of find your way into this Sphinx pose as you like. I'm going to do just a little kind of child posey cat-cowy thing, and then wind up in the Sphinx. Just kind of test out. Oh, it feels nice sometimes to test out kind of the limits that your back has having tonight before you sort of slide into the Sphinx. Now, if you wanted to, you can do the seal, which is to kind of prop up on the hands. I never need that much pressure. The Sphinx is almost always a nice spot to land, and then you can do the crocodile where you cross the arms, kind of rest either your chin or your forehead. So it's just a much lower profile back bend. So I like my elbow a little bit forward of my shoulder and slightly closer together than shoulder distance apart. I usually can find a nice place where it feels like everything balances and I don't have a lot of pressure on my neck. If you want, you can kind of do like a hybrid. If you've got a blanket or a couple pillows, you can sort of do the Sphinx propped up. So it gets you a little bit higher up, but maybe not quite as aggressive as the seal, and that's nice. That's a nice little kind of in-between space to land in. So I'm kind of choosing what's right for you. And we're going to do this guy for about 2 minutes, and then we're going to take it to a pose that's sometimes called heart chakra, and sometimes called, there's another name for it right now, and it's escaping my memory. Something like bleeding heart or something like that. You decide what you like. This is one of the things I find really entertaining about a lot of yoga poses. The ones that aren't super old and have like very established names have like sometimes 2 or 3 names associated with them. It's entertaining. You can make up your own names if you wanted to. Kind of notice too, I think, like, do you tend to grip with your glutes while you hold a pose like this? Can you stay relatively relaxed? And then we'll stay here for about another 4 or 5 breaths or so, and then we'll kind of test the waters out on the heart chakra, bleeding heart. There's probably another name for it too, but we'll test that one out. Let's see how it goes. Now, the next pose kind of shifts a lot of the intensity of this out of the lower back and into the kind of area right around where the shoulder blades live in the middle of the back, and that can be really sensitive. So I'm going to show you a couple of different possibilities for this guy, okay? So take a deep breath, come on out of the back bend. You can take a moment if you want to do little windshield wipers. We're essentially going to prop ourselves up almost like we're going to go to child's pose, but we're going to keep the hips a little further forward. The theory is you're going to put your chest on the floor and maybe the arms are extended. My mat's a little slippery, so I'm holding on to the ends of it so I can get that. Another possibility is to bend one arm, so your forehead rests on that one arm, and then the intensity is on one arm more than the other for me. And then the final possibility is that you actually bend at the elbows, and this one is my favorite. And you can either put the palms together or kind of rest the palms on your shoulder blades. Now, if it's too heavy on your forehead, then I would go with one of the other options. And we're dropping the chest toward the floor. Whether it touches or not is of no consequence, except for the pressure that's happening in your shoulders. Now I find this one quite a bit more intense, so I don't hold it as long. We're going to stay for about a minute and a half. And just do our best with it. If you need to come out or go all the way back to child's pose, do that. Melting heart. Melting heart is the other name for this pose. There it is. Now I've remembered it. Because the notion is that you're kind of melting your heart toward the floor. So we're going to do about 3 more deep breaths. Now to come out of this, I go forward, but you could also go backwards toward child's pose. So I just shift the weight into my forearms and come back towards that Sphinx. Oh. And then give yourself a little bit of movement. You can also do child's pose or curl up in a ball and cry softly to yourself for a few minutes. I've been known to do that after that pose as well. Hopefully you guys are okay. It's a big one, but that's like the spot where I'm the most in need of movement, is that kind of shoulder blade, middle of my back area. It's just very sensitive. Oh. But that felt kind of good. Oh. All right, yogis. So we're gonna do a swan pose. Now you can substitute a reclining swan where you lay on your back if you'd rather than the regular swan. Swan is another name for pigeon. Again, we kind of rename things here. So I'm gonna start with my right leg forward. I'm gonna put a little support under there. And you can also do it with support or without. And then my left leg is gonna go straight back. And I like to prop up, so it's a little more of a back bend. So I use some props, blocks, or pillows, or whatever it is. But you can also just lay down on the floor. So it's a little more kind of hip opener focused, a little bit more of a forward bendy kind of shape. That's up to you. So again, like one of my intentions for practice at this time of year is to work the stomach and spleen meridians, which come up the top of the thigh and through the front of the hip flexor, disappear, and then come out around the mouth. And so the intensity is on front body opening, lengthening the front body so that the hip flexors, the front of the belly, the side of the waist, the top of the thigh are all being asked to kind of open a little bit or give a little bit more give to them. And then the other part of the practice for me is softening through the mouth and trying to stay relaxed and really kind of kissable. Like really fluffy and soft and kind of very kind and inviting in the mouth. So that I'm not, creating little hard lines or hard edges with my lips. And that, again, because the stomach meridian runs all the way around the edges of the mouth, we're just kind of being aware of or bringing to a sensitivity to an area where we might kind of grip or tighten when we're feeling anxious or when we're having tricky lifetimes. Can't imagine why that would be the case. We're going to stay here for about 2 more minutes, but that does not mean that you personally have to stay here for that length of time. You could come out of this early and then just lay on your back and do some movement and experience, the kind of fallout or the reaction of the body to the pose. All right, yogis, so we're going to take a nice big breath. And we're going to come out of here. So the way that I'm going to do that is I'm going to kind of lean into this bent leg hip and then bring this knee in and come around. And I'm going to rinse everything out for a moment. Because the same leg that I've had up front is also going to be the bent leg for the saddle, or the half saddle. So for just a moment, I'm going to give myself a little rinse. Now for me, the half saddle is kind of a side leaning shape. So you could, instead of doing the half saddle, if the half saddle is similarly tricky for your knee, and leaning sideways is still too much, you can do a pose where you lay on your belly and hold your foot, or you can do the cat pulls its tail, where you would lay on your right side if you're doing your right leg, and left side if you're doing your left leg, and then you just kind of bring the foot around behind and reach back with your opposite hand and grab hold of the foot. And the reason you do the leg that's on the bottom, so for example, I'm laying on my right side, I bring my right leg back behind me, is so that you could then take your left foot and kind of put it in front in some way to help hold the leg in place. And if you can't hold it with your foot, you can do it. You can just hold it. I mean, if you can't hold it with your hand, you can just hold it with your leg. So if you need something, let me know and I'll show you that. But But otherwise, we're gonna try this. So I put a blanket down on the floor because that gives me some place to rest my shin. So I'm gonna put my shin on that blanket so that the top of my foot kind of goes just right over the edge of the blanket. So that gives me like a little bit of a lift in my leg. And then I'm gonna use a pillow and probably a couple of blocks also to kind of lean back. Again, my foot doesn't nestle right up against my hip. So I turn sideways, so I line my hip up with my knee, and that way the joints, the hip joint and the knee joint, are pointing in the same direction. If your foot comes in close to your buttock, you'll probably be able to lie a little bit more straight on your back because your knee and your hip will mostly be pointing up at the same angle. So just kind of figure that out for yourself. And again, we're not here to destroy our knee. We're here to get a really good sensation of opening across the top of this thigh and then potentially the top of the hip. And for some of us too, it could be a bit of a back bend as well. So there's that part of it. And again, for me, kind of leaning, turning sideways is helpful because I can feel it in my thigh and in my hip flexor, but I'm not experiencing any discomfort in my knee. So you're just gonna need to figure that out. And again, if I were doing the cat pulls its tail, I would take this leg all the way over that way and put it in front of this guy and then hold my right foot with my left hand. And hopefully that makes sense. Or you can just lay on your belly and hold your right foot with your right hand. That'll work too. It's more like a sphinx with one leg. Providing you're not tired of the sphinx yet. Sometimes that happens too. So just kind of feel things out. We're trying to stretch the top of this thigh so you could kind of play with some different options for yourself if that gives you enough information. So we're gonna stay here. We've been here for about a little over a minute. We're gonna stay for a little bit longer, about another 3 minutes or so. So just kind of relaxing ourselves into it. Taking nice deep breaths. And again, if you feel, part of the way through this, maybe after 3 minutes, you're like, I think I'm done. Like, it's okay to come out of a yoga pose a little early. Just recognize what the impulse is. If you're feeling fidgety, it might be a good indication to just kind of back off and choose a slightly different version of the pose. If it's just that you realize there's no more space for you to go, like you've hit the edge of your tolerance, then definitely come out of the pose and do something that just feels nice to you in between. Or you can switch versions, that's also fine. But if you're finding that you're just feeling kind of antsy, can you notice if that's kind of more mental processing and less body stuff? And there's only you're going to figure out the difference between this. But sometimes, if we're feeling particularly anxious, it's hard to sit still for very long. And so can you use the breath and the sensation being provided by the pose to give you something to pay attention to? So you can let go of all the other stuff for at least a little while. It might come back later, but for now, just allowing ourselves to take like a little vacation from the normal nonsense that goes on inside of our brains. I've told some people this story before, but I'll tell it again. I spent about 1.5 years doing this so that I could really make sure that in fact what I thought I was discovering was in fact true. But one day I was sitting trying to formally meditate and my mind would not hush. We have 1 more minute, by the way. So I said to my brain, all right, fine, if you're just gonna jammer and talk up there, I'm gonna write down what you're saying because clearly it's important. And so I started like making little notes about when I caught myself not paying attention to the moment, what was I thinking about? What was I thinking about? And I realized that the pattern, there was kind of a pattern after about a couple of weeks of this. And then so I kept doing it to see. And in fact, there's really only 3 things that my brain thinks about. So most of the time I can ignore what's going on up there because it's gonna be exactly the same thing every single time. We're gonna take a really big breath. And then you're gonna glue your thighs together and I'm gonna roll out of this by squeezing my thighs so that my legs stay together, and then once my knee is totally free, or my shin is totally free, I can straighten out the leg. And that for me is the best way to come out of that half saddle. Now, other people come all the way up first, or you might have another methodology, and that's fine. You just wanna find the one that does the least amount of pressure on your knee. I like to wiggle the top of my foot here because that's been kind of smushed into the floor a little bit. And then I also like to kind of jiggle on the top of the thigh and through the hip itself, just to create like a little kind of pandiculative, not a great word, pandiculative movement. You know, animals pandiculate. So like, if you ever watch an animal, they'll kind of stretch and then they shake everything. And that's the same idea. This kind of rhythmic movement through the body. It can be slow or it can be fast, but it's the same idea. Okay, so I don't know if you figured this out or not, but we're gonna do those same two poses on the other side. So hopefully that was anticipated. You felt like it was coming. So we're gonna start with the swan, and you can decide, I'm gonna just turn around this way, but you can decide how you wanna do your swan, whether you wanna do it on your back, or you wanna do a more traditional kind of pigeony shaped version of it. And again, I'm gonna prop myself up so it's more of a back bend that I'm getting and a little less squishy forward bend. You can do it either way. Some people call the one where you kind of put your face on the floor the sleeping swan, and then this is the swan, but whichever way you want to do it. Simplifying the language, we'll just call them all swans. Some swans are white swans, some swans are black swans, some swans are little baby swans. Be any kind of swan you want. For a couple more minutes. And sometimes it's nice to just check in with the breath every now and again. I've been kind of paying attention really carefully to this kind of front part of my hip on the leg that's going in the back. Usually the other leg is way more interesting. It's producing a lot more sensation. But this side of my hip has become more sensitive in the last few months. And so just want some, you know, sometimes when you notice little parts of your body that are telling you little stories, becoming more sensitive, it's a good idea to just kind of check in, see how the breath impacts those poses, that area of the body. Am I taking care of myself in a way that is healing and produces or promotes my well-being, as opposed to, am I doing things that you know, could be potentially harmful? Yoga poses are supposed to always have two qualities, according to the Yoga Sutras that are, you know, pretty old. It's not the only documentation on yoga, but it's definitely an old one, dating back to around the turn of the Common Era. But yoga poses should have steadiness, and they should have a sense of well-being or sense of ease. The word is also the root of the word sugar, so it's like there's an implication that they should be nourishing in some way. So that's the question we ask ourselves. So we're going to do about 3 more breaths here. And just by kind of noticing and paying attention and being kind, I'm feeling a lot more kind of freedom and softness and pleasant sensation in that area of my hip than I was when I got started. So hopefully, similarly, the poses are doing nice things for you as well. So again, I'm going to kind of lean into my bent leg hip and bring this back leg around. And when you're ready to come out of your pose, I would suggest, you know, finding a way out of the pose that makes sense to you as well. We'll take just a moment. There's this thing that happens in my body when I do yoga poses, and you guys can tell me if you experience this as well, but this is kind of the thing that has been really interesting to me lately in the last year or so of my yoga practice, maybe a little longer than that. But there's the sense, right, where I feel like the body is still dealing with the pose, dealing with the pose, dealing with the pose. And if I'm doing a flowing practice, then it's like whatever the sequence of poses is. And then there's this moment where there's this kind of, this almost kind of sensation in the body where everything just sort of settles back. And the sensation of that is almost like, you know, when you ease the seat back in the car, it's just like, oh yeah. or you lay down or sit down at the end of a long day, right? That sort of sense of ease. And so I'm kind of watching for that moment before I move on to the next pose. So I had that moment, and I'm hoping you have too. But if you haven't, then maybe just keep moving around a little bit until you feel that sort of sense. And then when you're ready, you're going to come into whatever version of the half saddle you're doing, whether it's laying on your belly or this kind of sideways version, or a version where you're more on your, organize this so my foot's in the right spot. You're more on your back and a little less on the side, that sort of thing. So I go until I feel that sensation right there on the top of the thigh, and then I'm just going to wait with that for a little bit before I move further. And you can do something similar. And sometimes you never get permission to go past that spot, right? And that's the spot. You're going to stay right there for the whole rest of the pose. And other times there is the seemingly kind of a granting of permission. If the body gets softer, there's a little less sensation there. There's just that sense of ease that I was talking about kind of creeps in. Again, for me, it helps to keep the hip lined up with that knee. So I kind of roll myself a little bit to the side. Oh. You can kind of play with the angles on your pose and with props to kind of help support your knee or your shin or whatever you might need. My ear on this side must stick out a little bit more than the ear on the other side, because I'm having a hard time finding, like, where's a comfortable place to support my skull without smooshing my ear. Which is entertaining. I'm not sure I ever noticed that, really. I've been living with this body for a long time. Over 5 decades, and I'm discovering something new about my ear. Isn't that awesome? Oh, goodness. Just feeling what's coming up for you. Like this, usually this side is my like slightly less sensitive side. Like it definitely, I get a lot more ease on this side, but tonight, ooh, it's spicier. So I'm trying to find a way to sort of back off and get softer. Approach it with a little bit softer physicality and like a little bit more breath awareness. So just kind of checking yourself out a little bit. I know what I'm gonna do. Oh, that's nice. Much better. Now everything's getting softer. It's all because I was smushing my ear, y'all. Oh, goodness. So we're going to stay for about 2 more minutes here. Actually, it's a little less than that, but in any case. Getting more towards a minute now. Yogis, we're just noticing for a little bit longer. It's about 30 more seconds or so. So we're going to take a really big breath. And then we're going to come out of here. So I'm going to kind of squish the thighs together, kind of roll to the side, gently ease that knee out straight. And then take a few moments and just wiggle the foot, the knee, the ankle, whatever it is that you need to kind of rinse out or move around. Now we're going to join up for a wide angle seated pose. But again, if you want to take a couple moments and just lay on your back for a little bit, or you want to do some movement, I'm going to do some little movement with my legs before we get going. So you can do that as well. Get a little drink of water, whatever it is that might be nice. Okay. Now, when I sit with my legs in a V, with Yin, I try to be a little bit conservative. I don't go as far out as my legs will go, because I don't really like the sensation of jamming my hip here, like, you know, that kind of, the femur bone kind of pinching a little bit against the hip joint. So rather than take it out quite so wide, I just give just a little bit conservative. I can still feel a stretch in my inner thighs, but I'm not doing things that are potentially mean to my outer hip. Okay, so I'm gonna roll this guy up, and I'm tucking this little blanket under my knee. That's the second thing that I do to create a little bit of niceness. So I tend to hyperextend my knee. This protects my knee a little bit so I don't hyperextend here. For some of you, it might be better to sit up on the blanket. So you can fold the blanket and actually sit up so that the hips are elevated a little bit higher, and often that'll help the pelvis align, and it'll take pressure away from the knees. So you can experiment with what the right answer for you is. Is it going up a little bit? Is it putting support under the lower part of the body? You can kind of play with it. So we're gonna start with one leg, okay, and then we'll do the middle, and then we'll do the other leg, and then we'll come back to the middle. So we're gonna come to the middle twice. We're only gonna stay there for a short period of time, 2 minutes. But over each leg, we're gonna take 3 minutes. Now, if you wanted to, while we're here, you could bend the leg that we're not leaning over, right? So you can do a half dragonfly for each of the legs portions, and then do the full dragonfly just in the center pump if you want. Now, some people, when they try to lean forward in this pose, don't. So if your back tends to round, you can concentrate more on sitting up, and you can even do a twist this way for 2 minutes instead of folding forward, and then you can twist this way for 2 minutes. So you can shake it up a little bit if you would so desire. So I'm going to build essentially what is a yoga Stonehenge here. So I've got two, blocks, so that's creating my little posts, and then I'm going to use a pillow as a lintel over the top of that whole thing. I think I'm getting those right. If I'm mixing the terminology up, let me know. But in any case, so that I have something to kind of lean against here. So again, we're going to stay this way for about 3 minutes, and then we'll shift around. And I like to notice, like when I first get in this pose, am I lifting my hip up? If I let my hip stay on the ground, what happens? Like, how does it pull the pose around a little bit? It's not a problem if your hip is off the ground. It's just, you know, make a choice about whether you want to leave it like that or not. We're going to spend about another 30 seconds or so, about 4 or 5 deep breaths. Now I'm coming all the way up, big inhale. Now, if you bent that leg on the other side, whatever it was, then you can straighten that now. And you could just sit upright and hold this twist, just pointing down the length of that leg that you were just doing. Or you can come to the forward bending portion. So you can just fold straight down the center. So that's up to you. If you don't fold that much, don't be pushy. Just let yourself fold however much it folds. You can put your legs like up on the couch. You just have to be prepared to move around a lot. So you want to do more like a reclining version where you lay on the floor and prop your legs up on the couch or on the wall. You can if it's close enough. And it doesn't take too long to get there. Or save that one for the very end. That would be a nice spot too. just gonna take a couple more deep breaths. Okay, so we're gonna take a big inhale and come all the way up. And now we're going down the opposite leg. So just making that adjustment. And again, you could fold the leg you're not stretching out over if you want to do the half version. And if you need a moment to kind of pause first, you can take that moment and pause. And sometimes one side's a little more forgiving than the other. One side might be a little tighter than the other. So just making those little minor adjustments based on what you discover. Get to take nice, deep, smooth breaths. About another minute or so here. More deep breaths, yogis. Come all the way up. And so again, if you had the one leg bent, you would straighten that out, and then you could decide that you're going to do the last couple minutes, you know, with your legs up on the wall in a wide V, or your legs thrown up over the edge of the couch. You've got a couch nearby, or the bed, like if you've got a bed nearby. It just depends on where you're practicing as to what you might have handy to throw your legs up on. Credenza, whatever you got. Or you can fold down the middle like this. And coming back the second time to this little V feels a little more inviting on the second go round. Notice if it's any difference for you. So we've got just a little bit longer, just a few more breaths here. And then it's going to be time for Shavasana. So as we kind of begin the process of closing out our yin practice tonight, just noticing, kind of how you've experienced practicing tonight. Give yourself a little congratulations for actually getting on your mat tonight. We're going to take a nice big breath. And come it all the way up. Lean back. We've been like this for a while, so bend your knees carefully. And then you're going to just give yourself some movement. Now I'm going to throw my legs up over a pillow, and I'm going to use my blanket for a pillow. I'm going to use my blanket for a pillow and my pillow for a support. I recognize the potential silliness of that. But in any case, once you've had a chance to sort of get yourself in place, you can stretch out for your Shavasana, your final pose. Sometimes it's nice to do like some little windshield wipers or a little kind of happy baby or something like that, especially after a lot of forward bending. It feels kind of nice to do some little something. And then we'll just spend a few minutes with Shavasana. And this pose, the reason for this pose really, I think, is because nothing is tugging on the body. So we want to use whatever props we need to position the body comfortably so that we can do one more pose where we let the nervous system have nothing to pay attention to. So we can really slide deep into that parasympathetic nervous state where we're restful and the body can more adequately, more comfortably digest our food. When we're in anxious states, it's harder for us to digest well. I know I'm having some trouble along that line. And so I'm trying to give myself plenty of time to allow my body to relax. And most importantly, my mind to relax and stay present. So use this last pose that way. Just push the reset button for your nervous system. And if you've got some soft music, you can use the last song in the playlist that I put out this week. Just put that on in the background if you need. Give yourself something for your mind to occupy itself. And let go. take a moment just to notice the breath. Now the good news is that you're at your house, so you could probably stay in Shavasana longer if you wanted to. But as a team, we're going to take a really big breath. And let go with a, with a big old sigh. And then you can stretch if you are ready to come out of Shavasana and do something else. And if you want to stay longer, just stay. It'll be fine. Sometimes when I do yin on my own without involving you guys, I do it in my bed so I can just turn out the light and go to sleep. So you can crawl on up there into your own bed. If you're close enough by it, you can just get right in. So we're going to take a nice big breath together. And a big deep sigh. So thank you for joining me tonight for some candlelight, spooky light yin. Enjoy. Namaste.